They called him the architect of ruin. Aris Thorne didn't lead an army with rifles. He led an empire with algorithms. He was a myth draped in charcoal wool and a three-piece suit that cost more than a suburban home. He didn't need to spill blood to destroy a man. He simply whispered to the markets, and by morning his enemies were ghosts. Their bank accounts drained, their legacies turned to ash. But Aris Thorne never walked the streets of Manhattan alone. By his side, silent and terrifying, was Aries, a 140-pound American pit bull terrier. The tabloids called the dog the Enforcer. It was whispered that the beast could sense a lie before it was spoken, and that its jaws held the same uncompromising grip as its master's legal team. No one dared to step within 10 feet of Aris Thorne. Not the paparazzi, not the rival CEOs, and certainly not the staff, until one rain-drenched Tuesday, a woman who had nothing left to lose did the unthinkable. Naomi Rivers, a waitress whose soul was as frayed as the hem of her uniform, didn't flinch when the beast lunged. She didn't scream when the security detail reached for their tactical gear. She did something that stopped the breath of every billionaire in that room. She rewrote the laws of the Thorne Empire with a single trembling touch. This is the story of the girl who was invisible, the man who was untouchable, and the broken beast that brought them together. Before we begin, I want to ask you for a small favor. My mother told me that stories about kindness don't sell anymore, that the world only wants noise. But I believe in the power of a quiet heart. Help me prove her wrong. If you believe that even the smallest voice deserves to be heard, please hit that subscribe button. Let's show the world that these stories matter. Now let us step into the cold marble halls of the Gilded Pillar. The alarm clock on Naomi's bedside table didn't beep. It shrieked, a piercing metallic cry that tore through the thin veil of her 4-hour sleep. 4:15 a.m. The air in the tiny queen's apartment was damp, smelling faintly of old radiator steam and the lavender detergent she used to wash Maya's hospital blankets. Naomi didn't move for a full minute. She lay there, staring at the ceiling where a water stain looked like a map of a country she'd never visit. Her body felt like it was made of lead. Every joint ached, a dull, throbbing protest from the 16 hours she'd spent on her feet the day before. Her fingers, perpetually red from dishwater and tray carrying, curled slowly into fists, feeling the stiffness in her tendons that never truly went away. She thought about the numbers. The numbers were the ghosts that haunted her every waking second. $840 for the monthly rent. $1,200 for the previous month's utility arrears. And the big one, the number that sat on her chest like a physical weight. $54,000. That was the current balance on the bottom of the oncology statement sitting on the kitchen counter, mocking her with its cold, clinical precision. She rose, her feet hitting the cold linoleum with a quiet slap that echoed in the silence of the pre-dawn hours. She walked past the couch where her 16-year-old sister Maya lay sleeping. Maya looked so small under the mountain of quilts, her head bald and pale, her breathing shallow but steady. Naomi paused, her heart twisting with a physical pain so sharp it took her breath away. The smell of antiseptic clung to Maya's skin even here, a reminder that their lives were now measured in cycles of chemotherapy and white blood cell counts. "I will save you," she whispered into the darkness, the words catching in her dry throat. "I don't care if it kills me." By 5:30 a.m., Naomi was behind the counter of a Greasy Spoon diner, the smell of burnt coffee and cheap bacon clinging to her skin like a second layer of clothing. Her shift was a blur of pouring coffee for tired construction workers and wiping down sticky Formica tables. By 3 p.m., she was sprinting toward the subway, changing her shoes on the moving train, swapping the scuffed sneakers for the polished black flats required for her second job at the Gilded Pillar, Manhattan's most exclusive rooftop restaurant. The transition between worlds was jarring. She went from the grid of queens to the sterile, terrifying luxury of the elite in less than 40 minutes. Her mind still racing with the math of survival. The Gilded Pillar was not a place for food. It was a theater for power. The elevator opened onto a world of suffocating elegance. The floors were polished Nero Marquina marble, black as a moonless night and slick as oil, reflecting the panicked faces of the staff who moved upon them. The chandeliers weren't just lights. They were cascades of hand-cut crystal that shivered whenever the wind buffeted the glass walls 40 floors above the street. The air here smelled of bergamot, expensive cigars, and the metallic tang of dry ice. It was a place where a single bottle of wine cost more than Naomi's annual salary. And where the people didn't look at the staff, they looked through them, as if they were merely part of the furniture designed for their comfort. Rivers. Table 9 needs a water refresh, and for heaven's sake, fix your hair. You look like you've been dragged through a hedge, hissed Julian, the floor manager. Julian was a man who lived in a state of perpetual anxiety, his eyes always darting to the entrance, his fingers constantly adjusting his silk tie as if it were a noose. "I'm on it, Julian," Naomi said, her voice a low, tired rasp. She tucked a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, her skin pale and drawn. Her reflection in the mirrored pillar showed a woman who looked 10 years older than 28. Her eyes, once a bright, hopeful hazel, were now shadowed by deep violet circles of chronic fatigue that makeup couldn't hide. She grabbed the silver pitcher, the condensation chilling her palm, and began her rounds. She moved like a ghost, weaving between tables where men in $5,000 suits discussed restructuring companies. Polite word for firing thousands of people to save a decimal point on a spreadsheet. Then the atmosphere changed. It wasn't a noise. It was the absence of it. The roar of conversation at the bar died down to a whisper. The clinking of silverware slowed. A cold front seemed to sweep through the room, chilling the heated air. Aris Thorne had arrived. He walked with a predatory grace, his stride long and certain. Aris Thorne was a man of sharp angles, a jawline that could cut glass, obsidian eyes that held no warmth, and a presence that demanded the oxygen in the room. He didn't look around. He didn't have to. The world moved for him. But it was the creature at his side that held everyone paralyzed. Aries the pit bull was a masterpiece of muscle and scars. His coat was a deep, charcoal brindle that matched Aris's suit. He wore a thick leather collar adorned with silver studs, but there was no leash. He moved in perfect synchronization with Aris, his head level with his master's thigh. His ears were cropped, his face marked by old battles, and his eyes were wide, darting, and filled with a frantic, vibrating energy that spoke of a deep-seated instability. They were seated at table 1, the God table, situated in a private alcove overlooking the twinkling lights of the Empire State Building. Julian grabbed Naomi's arm, his grip bruisingly tight, his breath smelling of peppermint and nervous sweat. You're the only one who hasn't dropped a tray tonight. You take the scotch to table 1. If you fumble, if you even breathe too loudly near that dog, you are finished. Do you understand? Naomi nodded, her throat dry, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She balanced the heavy silver tray, a bottle of 50-year-old Macallan and Eatwo, crystal tumblers that felt heavier than they were as she approached the table. She saw the man Aris was meeting with, Silas Vane, a rival hedge fund manager who looked like he was about to vomit. Vane's hands were shaking as he clutched a leather portfolio. Aris, meanwhile, sat perfectly still, leaning back, one hand resting casually on the table, the other hovering near Aris's head but never touching him. "The merger is dead, Silas," Aris said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a resonant, terrifying depth like the rumble of distant thunder before a catastrophic storm. "I bought your debt this morning. By the time the markets open tomorrow, you won't even own the chair you're sitting in. Your properties in the Hamptons, your art collection, your reputation, it all belongs to me now." "Aris, please," Vane whimpered, the sound pathetic in the vast, luxurious space. "My family. The foundation. Give me a week." Aris didn't blink. "You should have thought of them before you tried to short my stock," he replied, his eyes cold and void of mercy. Naomi stepped closer, her breath shallow. She was 3 feet away when Aries suddenly went rigid. The dog's low growls started deep in his chest, a sound that felt like a physical vibration in the marble floor. His hackles rose, his powerful neck muscles coiling like a loaded spring. His lip curled, revealing teeth that could crush bone. Silas Vane bolted upright in a moment of pure, unadulterated terror, knocking his heavy chair over. The crash of the wood against the marble was like a gunshot in the silent room. Aries snapped. The dog didn't just bark. He erupted. He lunged forward, the silver-studded collar straining against the air, his roar a terrifying, panicked sound of pure trauma. Security guards reached for their belts, their faces masks of professional aggression. Guests screamed, chairs scraping as people scrambled away. Aris Thorne's face remained a mask of stone, but his hand gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. "Ares! Heel!" Aris commanded, his voice a whip crack. But the dog didn't listen. He was spinning, snapping at the air, his eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. He wasn't attacking. He was drowning in a flashback, a sensory overload triggered by the crash of the chair and the scent of Silas Vane's fear. "He's going to bite! Shoot him!" Someone yelled from the bar. Naomi didn't think. She didn't calculate the risk to her own life. She saw the dog's trembling limbs, the way his weight was shifted back, not forward. She saw the dilated pupils and the frantic, shallow panting. "He's not a monster," her mind whispered, a memory of her vet school days flickering to life with sudden piercing clarity. "He's a victim." Naomi dropped to her knees, disregarding the sharp pain as she hit the hard floor. The silver tray hit the floor with a deafening clang, the bottle of Macallan shattering into 1,000 amber shards, the scent of expensive alcohol filling the air. But Naomi didn't look at the mess. She didn't look at the furious billionaire. She looked at the dog. "Stop!" She cried out, her voice surprisingly steady, cutting through the chaos. "Don't touch him. You're making it worse. He's having a panic attack." She crawled forward on the marble, glass shards biting into her palms and knees, and she did the one thing no one in the world dared to do. She reached out her bare, trembling hand toward the beast's throat, the transition from the cramped, smelling of exhaust apartment in Queens to the Thorne estate in Alpine, New Jersey, felt less like a drive and more like a descent into a different dimension. Naomi sat in the back of the black, armored SUV, her fingers tracing the frayed edge of her coat pocket where she kept the small, blurred photograph of Maya. Outside, the world transformed. The gritty brick of the city melted into rolling hills, eventually guarded by 10-foot stone walls topped with discreet rotating security cameras. When the heavy iron gates groaned open, they revealed a driveway made of crushed white, quartz that crunched like bone under the vehicle's tires. The estate didn't look like a home. It was a monument to isolation. The main house was a brutalist masterpiece of glass, steel and gray limestone jutting out from the hillside like a jagged tooth. There were no flowers, no cluttered signs of life, only the oppressive, manicured perfection of a man who controlled everything. As Naomi stepped out, the air felt thinner here, colder, smelling of pine needles and expensive stone sealant. Aris Thorne was waiting for her in the grand foyer. The space was immense, the ceiling disappearing into shadows where a minimalist chandelier hung like a frozen explosion of needles. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled back to reveal forearms that looked as if they were sculpted from marble. He stood with a glass of amber liquid in his hand, staring not at her, but at the digital stock tickers scrolling silently across a hidden screen in the wall. "Your sister was moved to the private wing at Mount Sinai an hour ago," Aris said, his voice a low, vibrating baritone that seemed to hum through the floorboards. He finally turned his gaze toward her, his obsidian eyes scanning her face with the cold efficiency of a facial recognition program. "She has a dedicated nursing team, a sterilized suite, and the first round of the experimental protocol is being prepared. The debt is settled, Miss Rivers. You are now the most expensive employee I have ever hired." Naomi swallowed the lump of pride in her throat. She felt small in this cathedral of wealth, her thrift store shoes clicking hollowly on the Nero Marquina floors. "I'm not an employee, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion screaming in her bones. "I'm here because that animal is suffering. And because you are clearly out of options." Aris's jaw tightened, a microscopic shift that only someone as observant as Naomi would catch. He gestured toward a glass-walled corridor that led to the eastern wing. "Aris is in the conservatory. He hasn't eaten in 36 hours. He hasn't slept for more than 10 minutes at a time. My head of security suggested putting him down. They say he's a liability now. A broken weapon." "He isn't a weapon," Naomi snapped, her fatigue-sharpened temper flaring. "He's a living being that you've turned into a mirror of your own paranoia." She didn't wait for his permission. She walked toward the conservatory, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. When she entered the room, the scent of damp earth and tropical ferns hit her. It was a massive glass dome filled with exotic plants, but in the center, on a raised stone platform, Aries, the dog wasn't lying down. He was sitting perfectly upright, his muscles coiling and uncoiling beneath his scarred, charcoal coat. His ears were pinned back, and his eyes wide and bloodshot tracked the movement of every leaf outside the glass dot. Naomi stopped 10 feet away. She didn't approach. She sat down directly on the cold stone floor, crossing her legs, making herself as small and unthreatening as possible. She didn't look at the dog. Instead, she began to talk. Not to him, but near him. It was raining like this the day Maya got her diagnosis. She whispered, her voice a soft, melodic thread in the cavernous room. We sat in that tiny waiting room for 6 hours. The air smelled like floor wax and old magazines. I remember thinking that if I just didn't breathe, time would stop. If time stopped, the doctor couldn't say the words. Arisa's head tilted fractionally. The low, vibrating growl that had been humming in his throat subsided. Naomi continued, her words a slow burn therapy of sound. She spent the next 4 hours sitting there, describing the color of the sunset in Queens, the way Maya liked her toast burnt, the sound of the subway trains at 3 a.m. She was building a bridge of vulnerability, offering her own trauma as a sacrifice to the dog's shattered nerves. By the second week, the routine had become a ritual. Naomi lived in a suite that was larger than her entire apartment building, but she spent most of her time on the floor of the conservatory. She began to notice the patterns of the house. Aris Thorne was a ghost in his own palace. He moved in silence, fueled by espresso and the relentless demands of a global market. He watched her from the shadows of the upper balconies, a dark silhouette framed by cold glass, observing the way she slowly, agonizingly, earned an inch of the dog's trust each day. One night, the silence of the estate was shattered by a scream not from a human, but from Aries. Naomi bolted from her bed, her bare feet flying over the cold corridors. She found Aris already there, standing outside the glass doors of the conservatory, his face pale in the moonlight. Inside, Aries was thumping against the glass, his body convulsing in the throes of a night terror so violent he was bleeding from the mouth where he'd bitten his own tongue. I can't get close to him, Aris said, his voice sounding uncharacteristically fractured. Every time I try to comfort him, he thinks I'm the one who hurt him. Naomi pushed past him, entering the dome. The air was thick with the scent of copper and panic. Because you taught him that touch is a command, Aris. You never taught him that touch is a comfort. She moved toward the thrashing animal. Aries, look at me. It's the rain. It's just the rain on the glass. She used her body as a shield, pressing her weight against the dog's ribcage, ignoring the danger of his snapping jaws. She felt the violent tremors racking his massive frame. She began to hum a low, wordless tune her mother used to sing when the electricity was cut off and the apartment was freezing. Slowly, the dog's breathing hitched. His head dropped onto Naomi's lap, his heavy jowls staining her white nightgown with blood and saliva. He let out a long, shuddering sigh that sounded like a sob. Aris watched from the doorway, his hand resting on the cold steel frame. For the first time, he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a boy who had been locked in a dark room and forgotten. How do you do it? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. How do you stay so soft when the world has been so hard to you? Naomi looked up, her hazel eyes reflecting the moonlight. Softness isn't weakness, Mr. Thorne. It's a choice. It's the only thing that survives the fire. She saw him flinch as if she had struck him. He walked away into the darkness of the hallway, but for the first time, his footsteps didn't sound so certain. Over the next few days, the distance between them began to shrink. It started with small things, a tray of food left outside the conservatory for her, a blanket draped over her shoulders when she fell asleep next to Aries, a book on veterinary neurology placed on her bedside table with a handwritten note that simply said, "Thank you." But as Aries began to heal, the world outside was beginning to rot. Aris spent more time in his war room, the flickering blue light of the monitors casting ghastly shadows on his face. He was being hunted. Not by men with guns, but by men with ledgers. The rival CEO, Marcus Vane, had been leaking falsified reports about Thorne's offshore accounts, trying to trigger a SEC investigation that would freeze his assets and effectively end Maya's treatment. One evening, Naomi found Aris in the library, surrounded by mountains of legal documents. The fireplace was cold, and the air was thick with the smell of old paper and desperation. "They're coming for the foundation, Naomi," he said without looking up. His voice was hollow, stripped of its usual arrogance. "If they freeze the accounts, the hospital will stop the protocol. I've built a fortress, but I forgot that the walls can be bypassed by a single lie." Naomi walked over to him, her hand hovering over his shoulder before she finally let it rest there. He didn't pull away. Under the expensive fabric of his shirt, his muscles were like iron, coiled with a tension that threatened to snap. "You taught Ares how to fight," she said softly. "But you never taught him how to hide. Maybe it's time we stop trying to outrun them and start building a trap of our own." Aris looked up at her, and for a split second, the architect of ruin and the invisible waitress were the only two people left in the world. The power dynamic had shifted. He wasn't the savior anymore, and she wasn't the victim. They were two broken things leaning against each other in the dark, preparing for a war that hadn't even begun. The peace within the Thorn estate had always been an expensive illusion. A fragile glass dome protected by billions of dollars and encrypted firewalls. But as the third week bled into the fourth, the glass began to crack. The high-definition monitors in Aris's private war room no longer showed steady green lines of growth. Instead, they were hemorrhaging red. Marcus Vane, a man whose soul was as hollow as his promises, had struck a blow that didn't involve a single drop of blood. He had leaked a series of meticulously forged documents, offshore accounts, shell companies in the Caymans, and whispered allegations of money laundering that pointed directly at the foundation funding Maya's treatment. To the SEC, it looked like Aris Thorn was using a dying girl as a tax haven. To the public, it looked like a scandal. To Naomi, it looked like a death sentence. The news broke at 6 p.m. on a Friday. Naomi was in the kitchen, carefully preparing Ares's dinner raw steak, infused with the vitamins the vet had prescribed. She heard the shattering of glass from the study. She found Aris standing over his mahogany desk, his breathing heavy and ragged. A crystal decanter lay in shards at his feet, the expensive cognac soaking into a Persian rug that was worth more than a house. His face, usually a mask of impenetrable marble, was contorted with a fury so cold it made the air in the room feel like ice. "They've frozen them," Aris whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrifying low-frequency rage. "The federal marshals served the injunction 10 minutes ago. Every account tied to the Thorn Foundation is under a temporary freeze pending a full audit. That includes the hospital's direct billing." Naomi felt the world tilt. The tray in her hands shook. "Maya! Aris, they can't just stop. She's in the middle of the cycle. If they stop now, her body won't—" "I know." Aris roared, spinning around. His eyes were bloodshot, the dark circles under them looking like bruises. He looked at her, and for the first time Naomi saw it, the raw, naked fear of a man who had finally found something he couldn't buy his way out of. "I have private accounts, but they're being monitored. Any significant movement of funds will be flagged as an attempt to hide assets. Marcus didn't just attack my business, Naomi. He built a cage around me." For 3 hours, the house was a tomb. Aris retreated into his silence, staring at the digital tickers that were now mocking him with their downward spirals. Ares, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, wouldn't leave Naomi's side. The dog sat with his heavy head on her knee, his low whimper the only sound in the suffocating stillness of the library. Then, the doorbell rang. Not the usual chime of a scheduled delivery, but a sharp, insistent demand. It was a courier. A single, nondescript envelope. Inside was a tablet, preloaded with a video call. When the screen flickered to life, Marcus Vane's face appeared, smooth, tanned, and wearing a smile that made Naomi's skin crawl. "Hello. Hello? Aris. I see the weather in Jersey is as gloomy as your stock price," Marcus said, his voice dripping with artificial sympathy. He looked past Aris, his eyes landing on Naomi. "And you must be the help. The girl from Queens. You've done wonders with the dog, I hear. It's a shame your sister's care has become such a legal complication. What do you want, Marcus?" Aris asked, his voice deathly quiet. "Total surrender," Marcus replied, leaning back in his leather chair. "I want the Thorn-Vane merger finalized by Monday morning. I want 51% of your voting shares. And in exchange, I'll provide the clarifying documents to the SEC that show the foundation's funds were, in fact, legitimate. Your sister gets her medicine. You get to keep your house. But you lose your crown. The call ended with a sickening click. Aris sat in the darkness, his head in his hands. The architect of ruin was being dismantled, piece by piece, by a man who didn't even have the courage to face him in person. You're going to give it to him, aren't you? Naomi asked. Her voice was small, but it cut through the gloom. I have no choice, Aris said into his palms. I can rebuild a company. I can't rebuild a life. Maya is the only thing in this world that isn't a transaction. Naomi, if losing my empire is the price of her heartbeat, then I'll pay it. Naomi walked over to him. She didn't offer a platitude. She didn't tell him it would be okay. Instead, she knelt beside his chair, mirroring the way she had knelt before Ares on that first night. She took his hand, the hand that had signed billion-dollar deals and crushed rivals, and she squeezed it until he looked at her. He thinks you're a predator who has been cornered, she said, her hazel eyes burning with a fierce, quiet intelligence. He thinks I'm just a waitress who's scared for her sister. He's looking at the numbers, Aris. He isn't looking at the shadows. Aris frowned. What are you saying? Marcus Vane is arrogant. He thinks he's smarter than you because he's winning. But he's also greedy. And greedy people always leave a trail. She leaned in closer. When I was in vet school, we learned about passive surveillance. You don't hunt the wolf by chasing it. You find where it drinks and you wait. You told me Marcus has been leaking these documents for weeks. Where did he get the data? He had to have someone inside your network. Someone who felt invisible. Aris's eyes narrowed. My head of IT. Or perhaps the archival team. But they're all vetted. Check the maintenance logs, Naomi whispered. The people who clean the servers. The people who deliver the water. The people Marcus thinks are part of the furniture. Just like he thinks I am. The next 48 hours were a blur of high-stakes digital warfare. Aris and Naomi didn't sleep. They lived on black coffee and adrenaline. While Aris used his remaining back-channel connections to trace the digital breadcrumbs, Naomi did something Marcus would never suspect. She used the one thing Marcus had overlooked, her invisibility. Dressed in a borrowed courier uniform, Naomi drove to the city. She went to the office of the ESSEC investigator, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, who was known for her incorruptibility. Naomi didn't go as a representative of Aris Thorne. She went as a sister. She sat in that sterile office for 4 hours until Sarah finally saw her. Naomi didn't talk about stocks. She talked about the smell of hospital corridors. She showed Sarah the photos of Maya, and then she handed over the one thing Aris had found in his archives, a series of encrypted communication logs between Marcus Vane and a disgraced former auditor, showing the exact moment the documents were forged. Mr. Thorne didn't send me, Naomi told the investigator, her voice trembling but her gaze unwavering. He doesn't even know I'm here with this specific file. I'm here because my sister is dying, and a man is using her as a pawn in a game she never asked to play. Please, just look at the metadata. Back at the estate, the tension had reached a breaking point. It was Sunday night. The merger was scheduled for 9 a.m. Aris was sitting in the library, a single pen resting on the surrender documents. I haven't heard from the SEC, Aris said, his voice hollow. He looked at Naomi as she walked back into the room, her face pale from the cold. You took a massive risk, Naomi. If Marcus finds out you bypassed his blockade. He won't, she said, walking over to him. She looked at the dog Ares, who was resting his head on Aris's foot. The man and the beast were now inseparable. Two souls bonded by the woman who had refused to fear them. The phone on the desk rang. It wasn't the tablet. It was a secure line. Thorne, Aris answered. He listened for a long moment, his face transitioning from exhaustion to a cold, predatory light that Naomi had only seen once before. Yes, I see. And the accounts? Immediate? Thank you, Sarah. He hung up. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of a tomb anymore. It was the silence of a trap being sprung. The SEC just issued an emergency freeze on Vane Capital, Aris said. His voice regained its velvet authority. They found the metadata. Not only is my foundation cleared, but Marcus is being investigated for federal racketeering and evidence tampering. The feds will be at his door by dawn. He stood up, walking toward Naomi. The distance between them, once miles of social standing and cold iron, had vanished. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her skin. "You saved me," he whispered. "You saved all of us." "We saved each other," she replied. But as the sun began to rise over the Jersey hills, Naomi knew the war wasn't over. Marcus Vane was a cornered rat, and cornered rats were the most dangerous animals in the world. As the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, Aries let out a low, warning growl. The climax was coming, and this time the price wouldn't be paid in shares or stocks. The dawn didn't bring peace. It brought a cold, gray clarity. By 8 a.m., the financial news was a wildfire. Vane Capital under federal investigation. Marcus Vane wanted for questioning. The stocks Aries had fought to protect were rebounding, buoyed by the SEC's public exoneration of the Thorne Foundation. But inside the estate, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. Aries was at his desk, his eyes fixed on the security feeds. While Aries paced the perimeter of the library, his low growl a constant, vibrating warning. "He's not going to the FBI," Aries said, his voice a jagged edge of certainty. "Marcus is a narcissist. He won't survive a cell. He'll try to burn everything down before he lets me win." The breach didn't come from a hacker or a shell company. It came from a black sedan that ignored the sirens and the checkpoints, barreling through the secondary gate of the estate. Marcus Vane didn't arrive with an army. He arrived with a desperate, frantic madness. He was intercepted in the courtyard by Aris's security, but he wasn't carrying a weapon. He was carrying a phone, screaming into the wind about the insurance he had planted in Maya's hospital room. Naomi ran to the courtyard, her heart stopping at the mention of her sister. Aris was already there, standing like a wall of granite between Marcus and the house. "I have someone inside, Aris!" Marcus shrieked, his expensive suit disheveled, his eyes wild with the look of a man who had stared into the abyss and lost his mind. "One word from me, and the accidental overdose in your sister's foreline becomes a reality. You think you won? You think this waitress saved you? I'll take the only thing she loves and turn it into dust." The silence that followed was suffocating. Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Aris, expecting to see the architect of ruin, the man who calculated every move. Instead, she saw a man who was ready to tear the world apart. "You're lying, Marcus," Aris said, his voice so quiet it was terrifying. "Because you're a coward. You didn't plan for a loss. You didn't plant anyone. You're just a rat trying to find a fall to hide in. Try me." Marcus lunged forward, but he didn't count on the one variable he had always mocked. Ares didn't wait for a command. The dog didn't attack with the blind fury of the beast Marcus had created. He moved with the surgical precision Naomi had taught him. He lunged, pinning Marcus to the gravel, his massive jaws hovering inches from the man's throat. Ares didn't bite. He simply held him there, a 140-pound force of nature that refused to be a weapon anymore. He was a guardian. Ares stepped forward, looking down at the man who had tried to destroy his life. He didn't use violence. He simply held up his own phone. "The hospital is secure, Marcus. My private security has been in Maya's room since midnight. Your insurance was intercepted 3 hours ago. You're not a predator anymore. You're just a mistake." The federal marshals arrived minutes later, the blue and red lights reflecting off the glass walls of the mansion. As they hauled Marcus Vane away, the man who had built an empire on shadows finally disappeared into the back of a sterile van. 6 months later, the Thorne estate looked different. The gray limestone was now softened by climbing roses, and the silence had been replaced by the sound of laughter. Maya was there, her hair growing back in soft, dark curls, her cheeks flushed with the health that only a miracle and $1 billion could buy. She was sitting on the grass, throwing a tennis ball for Ares, who leaped and ran with a joy that seemed impossible just half a year ago. Aris and Naomi stood on the terrace watching them. The wind from the Jersey hills caught Naomi's hair, and for the first time in years the violet circles under her eyes were gone. She wasn't an invisible waitress anymore. She was the woman who had tamed the architect of ruin. The board approved the new foundation budget this morning, Aris said, leaning against the railing. He wasn't looking at the markets. He was looking at her. We're opening 3 more pediatric oncology centers. No transactions. No debt, just help. It's a start, Naomi said, smiling. Aris turned to her, reaching into his pocket. He didn't pull out a contract or a ledger. He pulled out a ring, a simple, stunning diamond set in platinum, reflecting the light of a sun that was finally rising on their terms. I spent my whole life building walls to keep people out, Aris whispered, his hand trembling slightly as he took hers. I thought vulnerability was a death sentence. But you showed me that the only way to truly survive is to let someone in. Naomi Rivers, you are the only person who ever saw me. Not the money, not the power. Just me. He went down on one knee, not as a king surrendering, but as a man finding his home. Will you build this empire with me? Not one made of glass and steel, but one made of… U.S.? Naomi didn't hesitate. She didn't look at the house or the cars. She looked into the obsidian eyes that now held a warmth she had fought to find. Both, she whispered, echoing the words she had said on the steps months ago. I choose both. As Ares barked in the distance and Maya laughed, Aris slid the ring onto her finger. The destiny shift was complete. The underdog had found her justice, the beast had found his peace. And the billionaire had finally found a wealth that couldn't be counted on a spreadsheet. They stood together as the sun bathed the estate in gold, a modern fairy tale written in scars, but finished in love. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments with those who believe that destiny can change everything one day. Subscribe, because when destiny shifts, everything changes.